As the frantic and fruitless search for Amelia continues, the world may not have heard the last from her. Within hours of her disappearance, distress calls are reported by professional radio operators and later by amateurs with shortwave sets around the Pacific and across the United States. Eventually, more than 100 reports come in, and the Navy and news media take them seriously, looking for clues. If Amelia is using her radio, she must be on land. To charge her batteries, she has to run the Electra's right engine, and it can't run unless the propeller is above water. On the night of July 3rd, calls apparently from Amelia are picked up by Pan Am Airways direction-finding stations at Midway, Oahu, and Wake Island. When they track the signals to their source, it's in the Phoenix Islands, which includes Gardner, now called Nikamororo. Some of the messages could help pin down Amelia's whereabouts. In Rock Springs, Wyoming, 16-year-old Dana Randolph claims to have picked up a call from Amelia, who says she is on a reef south of the equator. A woman in eastern Canada says she hears Amelia saying that the navigator is badly injured. Perhaps the most intriguing report comes from St. Petersburg, Florida. Betty Klenk was a teenager in 1937. She often spent the afternoon listening to her family's shortwave radio, which was hooked up to a powerful antenna. And she kept a notebook handy to jot down the titles and lyrics of songs she liked. One July afternoon, while searching the dial, she hears a familiar voice.
The first thing I heard was, "This is Amelia Earhart." And that startled me. She said it several times, and I recognized that voice when I heard it.
Betty shared her notebook and her memories of that day with Rick Gillespie in an interview for the Tiger Archives. She recalled that she listened for 2 hours as the signal faded in and out, and she took notes on what she heard.
She was hurting, there was something terribly wrong.
It was a voice of desperation, of a woman in grave danger. Betty heard a man's voice too. She believes he was injured, and there were sounds of a struggle.
You could hear him, but you couldn't make out what he was saying. But you could tell that she was trying to keep him away from the radio. And they'd wrestle around when he would try to get on.
It reads like a modern transcript of a 911 call. There's confusion. There's things going on in the background.
Betty remembers thinking she heard Amelia say New York City, and she wrote that down.
And then she writes, or something that sounds like New York. New York City, Norwich City, Norwich City. Where we think the plane landed on the reef is right near the shipwreck, the Norwich City. And so you think of Earhart and Noonan on this island, if they don't know the name of the island, and they want to communicate the one thing about this island that is unique and the piece of information they can give, there's a shipwreck there. And the name of the ship is the Norwich City.
Betty's notes about rising water would make sense if the plane were parked on the reef, subjected to shifting tides. At the time she was listening, it was nearly noon on the island. The interior of the metal plane would have been broiling hot, which could explain the injured man's desperation to get out.
He was so uncomfortable and so miserable that they would just talk. And then he would kind of get out of his head again.
The transcriptions in her notebook give us almost too intimate a picture of what was going on that reef. These people were in horrible trouble.
Some have questioned how Amelia's signals could have traveled thousands of miles to be picked up by a few random listeners in North America.
You're telling me that this young woman was the only person in the entire world that heard those communications. That doesn't seem reasonable or logical to me.
But it is possible. The kind of radio that Amelia had on her plane often created extra signals, called harmonics, at multiples of the original frequency. Those harmonics can bounce off the ionosphere and travel vast distances. Radio expert Bob Brandenburg believes that Amelia's normal daytime frequency of 6,210 kilohertz would generate harmonics that could reach Betty's receiver.
Those very high frequencies propagate very well. And so the way Betty described the signal, fading in and out, is exactly consistent with the way that signal would behave at that frequency being transmitted from Gardner Island.
Finally, the signal faded out completely. The voices were gone.
I don't know how long I sat there. I'd say probably, knowing me, I probably waited an hour. We never heard any more.
Betty may be the last person ever to have heard Amelia Earhart alive. And if she really did, chances are good that Amelia was calling from Nika Mororo.